Hong Kong relations, Mr. Lee is sympathetic towards the territory. He says Beijing will never take Hong Kong as an equal partner in any negotiations.
Why can't Hong Kong play a role in the final arrangement in the sense we can communicate straight and, okay, I wouldn't say on strictly equal footing or more or less. Right now, whenever somebody emerges from somewhere, it will become some sort of a three-legged stool, which China would denounce immediately. Now, China will have to work with us for 50 years, from 1997. So why can't we sit together and talk like partners? Instead, we go through the British all the time. And things may not turn out, as we wish. You do think China can't accept this kind of arrangement? And that is very confusing mind. Confused in a sense,
you know the answers as well as I do.
So that's why people are not happy, you see.
I understand that. Look, I have discussed with some of my Singapore friends who attend conferences in Hong Kong, where mainland representatives take part. These are language conferences on the Chinese language, culture, and so on. Basic attitude. We were talking in Mandarin, so he said, 老大哥的态度
The big brother.
太傲慢了 very, very superior attitude. I think that is a deep problem you have to face. It's a deep cultural problem in that the center of civilization has always been China, and that Hong Kong are all Hong Kong, Taiwan, Auman, Macau are peripheral border regions. They are the cultured, cultivated people. It goes back to...
Yeah, but that's not a good way to deal with things these days, right?
I agree, and I think if I have a chance, I will try and convey that disservice they are doing themselves.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that they can just issue a directive and say, please stop being bossy. Because it is in the culture. They didn't tell the professors and the participants to be bossy. They just felt, well, I'm from the center.
So you promised to pass the message about our feeling.
Without causing offense, in a friendly way.
I'm sure you can manage that, Mr. Lee. You know them very well. So let me ask one question, which is the minds of some people. The CRC, the Cooperative Resources Center,
yes.
A group mostly of appointed members, made a call for referendum. Now, it seems to us, both Britain and China are quite unwilling, to resort to this. Now, why can't we have some kind of referendum as a test of public opinions, rather than as a constitutional measure to overrule British decision or Chinese decision, or strictly as an opinion test? Can that apply in a territory like Hong Kong?
You are entering into dangerous territory.
Even as a test of public opinion.
If you have a referendum in Hong Kong, then why shouldn't you have a referendum in Shenzhen? And if you have a referendum in Shenzhen to decide how policy should be, why should you not have a referendum in Zhuhai or Dongshan or Guangzhou? And so it will go on. And that is, as I've said, Chinese tradition has never rested on counting heads.
You know, the conflict is escalating, and we see no impasse out of it. Now, it seems economic developments are suffering from the dispute between Britain and China. Is it possible to separate economic things from political disputes? In the final arrangement, for Hong Kong, say they can argue over politics, but leaving economic developments, go its own way.
But that's not life. That's not what economic development is about.
But say, for instance, the cable TV,
No.
or you know, the number 9 terminal, and there are speculations in town, you know, these things are being held up because of China's objection. They want to settle the political
Well, you take China and the United States, right? They should separate politics from economics. I mean, trade is trade, MFN is trade, and human rights is politics. But the Americans roll them up. So in the same way, I think China rolls Terminal 9 and
But do
other
you think
things.
things would be better if Patton takes a more mild approach? Then they can argue behind doors.
No, I don't think so.
If it comes to fundamental things.
There may be less sparks in public, but
It's still the same.
but the objection is a fundamental objection, and the Chinese do not consider this a UK-China issue, because Britain has no economic, military or political clout to see this thing through. Because if she had, she would have done this years ago, right? 1984, 1985. Why wait till 1992? So I think the Chinese see this as rolled up with the American pressure on democracy and human rights. And if they give way here in Hong Kong to the British, then they're inviting more pressure from the Americans. And what is interesting is to read Mr. Bill Clinton, the president-elect, in today's newspapers. I think it's very significant for Hong Kong, because he is saying, let us not cancel MFN lightly, because it means $15 billion worth of jobs. And that's a lot of jobs for America, and it's growing, he says. So he wants China to improve some human rights, and MFN will continue. He never mentioned democracy, which I think is most significant. So it means that the Americans are not prepared to use MFN and have a head-on clash with China for democracy, which means they are not going to adopt the Hong Kong issue.
So
I read that as President Bill Clinton's confining of his economic problems to human rights issues, not widening it to democracy. I mean, he would also have had advisors who would have said, look, Helmut Schmidt, Chancellor of Germany, went there, studied it, and said, don't press them on democracy. They can do quite well without democracy in China. And you're not going to win.
But what about Mr. Clinton's statement earlier about a role for America? He said earlier, didn't he understand the whole issue at that time?
I'm not here to explain to you American politics.
What you just said now seems, you know, he contradicted himself in a sense. At first he said, you know, America perhaps should play some kind of a role in this dispute.
When he said that, he was,
Just elected.
No, it was still post-election talk. Now it's pre-office talk. He's going to be responsible for unemployment. He's going to be responsible for getting the economy moving. However he has spoken before, he must decide in a way that will solve his problems, not aggravate them.
I see.
And I consider this statement today a very serious shift in position. After discussing with all his economic advisors, he has decided, let us not cut off trade with China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and ASEAN, because that is the consequence of cutting off MFN. he made it quite clear he represents the Prime Minister and is very close to the Foreign Secretary. The Prime Minister decided on this new policy before the 1st of January this year, because he announced the elevation of Sir David Wilson to Lord Wilson on the 1st of January. In other words, he was leaving the position vacant until the elections were over. At that time, Mr. Chris Patten was a minister and Conservative Party chairman, so he was not available for this job. He has nothing to do with this policy. The script, the plot was already written up. They were just looking for a principal lead actor. He was free. It was a difficult job. I do not envy him. It is an extremely onerous job. It's like belling a tiger who's awake and in bad temper. And if it has to be changed, it will be changed in London and not in Hong Kong.
Then it can't be changed in Beijing?
I doubt it. Why should they change it?
Why not?
Lord Mary McIlhouse have said that the British have a case to answer for breaching or appearing to be in breach in 2 instances. Why should they give way? President-elect Clinton has said, let's only talk of human rights and we will continue to trade. Please act more reasonably. No mention of democracy, so no adoption or no championing of the Hong Kong cause. And even if he had, even if Clinton had said, and we support the British in Hong Kong, I think the Chinese will just harden even more. Because if you support democracy in Hong Kong, the Chinese know that what the Americans want is democracy in China. Whether you have democracy more or less in Hong Kong with 6 million people is of no strategic or geopolitical significance to the world. It's very important to you because it's life and death for you. But to the world, it is of no consequence. But a China which is democratic makes for a more peaceful world. And that is the objective. And that's the last thing the Chinese Communist Party is prepared to concede.
Assuming we cannot get out of this impasse, in the end, who will stand to gain and who will stand to lose?
I've asked myself that question. By this move, John Major and the British government have put at risk British interests in Hong Kong, which is at least about 150 billion US dollars. Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank, Stan Chart, Swire Pacific, whole host of companies. Also Britain's long-term interests with China, trade, investments, year by year. Also Hong Kong interests of Hong Kong people in China worth few $100 billion. I ask myself why. Because the clout to see the problem through is not with Britain. The clout is with America. It is only if America adopts this issue and pushes it through that it has a chance of succeeding. So the Chinese says you are internationalizing the issue, right? And of course Mrs. Thatcher says, no, we are not trying to. But, you know, that's just words. The Chinese are calculating. Who can put pressure on them? The US. This must have been a move of such great consequence that the British government was prepared to put at risk British interests in Hong Kong, British interests with China, and Hong Kong was just a pawn on a big chessboard in which the major players are the US and China.
So this will not be in British interest either? From the way
I believe that is the reason why three very senior and very distinguished diplomats who reached the top of the pyramid. Sir Percy Craddock, Lord Mary McIlhose, Lord David Wilson came out against their political masters that whom they have served is most unusual, unprecedented for professional foreign service officers who have retired to come out in public and say, we are in breach of the agreement, back off. We are harming Hong Kong and Hong Kong's interest. And of course, without saying so, we are also harming Britain's interests in Hong Kong and with China. But I believe there was a bigger geopolitical objective of a democratic China, which was very important to America and to the West. And for that, Hong Kong was moved as a pawn on the chessboard. That is my
assessment.
My piecing together of the various very odd, very puzzling moves. This could have been done if democracy was important, that important to the British and to Hong Kong, way back in 1985. Before Tiananmen, Beijing may have agreed. But in 1992, such a short time to bring out such an issue, there must have been a compelling reason. And that reason is higher alliance objective, Western alliance objective.
So we have to continue to depend on an uncertain situation for at least some time.
I think hold your breath. I have faith that ultimately common sense will prevail, the realities of the power balance will be recognized, and the Hang Seng